We off in this place, catching vibes, sit back and we blaze in the sky like I'm out of space. Natural high, light it up, light it up, light it up, light it up, light it up.
What's going on, cigar world? What's going on, cigar enthusiasts? This is Jack, the cigar enthusiast, and I believe this is our first segment of 2021, man. I hope you guys had a great Christmas as well as New Year's, but you already know we back with another banger, and I couldn't pick no better guest to really start 2021 off than the guest that we have, our guest of honor, which we're going to introduce him in a second. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, give us a big thumbs up. That's if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and like and subscribe, or follow, for that matter, the Virtual Smoke Deck live podcast page, as well as go ahead and like and follow Dapper D's Cigars for all the updated content on what Dapper D's has to offer. With that being said, today, man, we are happy to be back, man. I took a 2-week hiatus to kind of get content and everything together, but also to really get to the point of, refreshing, right? The podcast has been going for right now a little over 6 months. So I wanted to make sure that we came back with a bang in 2021. And I tell you, not to take any credit from our guest of honor today, but we got some lineups that is hot off the press. With that being said, man, I hope you guys had a wonderful New Year's, a wonderful Christmas. And again, this is grind time. 2020 really left us in a turmoil, really put some mess onto everything. And I tell you what, 2020, that was 2020, but 2021 is going to be much better. It's going to be much more to come of everything that we have to show for. And you got to look at it from a positive standpoint, man. It's time to grind. With that being said, man, if y'all new to this podcast, make sure y'all comment in the comment box so we can go ahead and put your comments on the screen, as well as any questions that you may have for our guests. Pop them up on the screen. We'll make sure we get to it. We do try to pop all comments on the screen, and then if it's a question, we'll tell you, hey, we're going to get back to that one. But a couple of people that's watching right now, shout out to everybody that's watching. Without you guys, this wouldn't be possible. These shows for 2021 is dedicated to you. With that being said, man, shout out to LA Wiser that's out there in California watching all the way from Cali. Ron Brown, man, thanks for tuning in, brother. Mike, man, Shirtless Mike is in the building, man. Shirtless Mike actually has a podcast with some phenomenal content on it. Make sure y'all check him out. Mike, go ahead and comment your stuff below so we can go ahead and get that on here so everybody can see and know where to support you at. Man, shout out to my man D-Hub, man. Nice to see y'all in 2021. With that being said, man, it's time to roll into the nit and gritty of this segment, man. Our special guest, or more or less our guest of honor, is one guy that's well known in the industry, and me personally, hands down, one of the most dapperest guys besides me in the industry, man. I remember seeing this guy in magazines and all that stuff, and just the way he takes his pictures and the way he dresses, man, it's iconic. It's iconic. It's really a game changer for that matter, man. So I was happy when he said that he would go ahead and take our invitation for him to come on to the show. And but 2020 has been one of those years for him that is, it's been shattering. Something that you built so long, something that you have done so many times, and it was like your baby. It's like, it was a very, very bad breakup, in my opinion, but we're going to hear from him. Without further ado, welcome our guest, Michael Herklots. What's up, champ?
Oh, you made me cry with that opening, bro. No, what's up, man? Happy 2021.
Man, happy 2021. I'm telling you, I think everybody is excited to be in this year now.
I'll tell you, 2020 was quite a year. I posted earlier this week I said, it's not the year we necessarily expected or we wanted, but it is the year we got.
Yes.
And thank God, many of us have gotten through it. Hopefully we've gotten through it stronger and ready for whatever comes our way. So 2021, let's do it.
2021 is one of those years 2020 is one of those years that is going to hands down go down in history books. Like we was talking a little bit before this, before we got on, 2020 is going to be like the plagues and different things that we've seen in those history books. And it's going to be one of those things that our kids talk about. But like, I remember back in my time, we had the global pandemic that really swept the whole globe, not just the United States, not just Europe, it swept the entire globe. And not only did it hit the entire globe, but it hit the United States in something we wouldn't even expect it for. You know, we start talking about vaccines and all that stuff. And man,
I think things like this, if I look at the experiences before I was born, whether it's Korea, Vietnam, Pearl Harbor, you try to understand it, but there's no way to really understand what it feels like to experience it. Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, all these different movements and moments. I was 21 when 9/11 happened. That's still very fresh in my mind. And now, I look at 2020 very much the same way, because we all entered 2020 profoundly optimistic and energetic for this new decade. I mean, if you think of New Year's last year, the Roaring '20s, I mean, the theme was unbelievable. Who knew that what we would repeat is the worst part of the '20s, which was the end of that 1918 pandemic. So, I look back at it with very mixed emotions, not just because of what happened to the company that I worked so long for, but really just in its entirety. There was a tremendous amount of tragedy and a tremendous amount of loss, but there's also a tremendous amount of learning and strength that have come out of this. And for those of us lucky enough to survive this, we have got to come out stronger, more together, more unified, and ready to think differently and take on challenges in new and different ways, so that should something like this happen again, God forbid, we can't pretend that we're surprised, and we can't pretend that we don't know what to do. We've got to be able to deal with it. And if we haven't learned something in the last 8 or 9 months, then I think, we're probably leaving something on the table in 2020 that you might want to pick back up in 2021.
I think it's funny, right? It's still to this day. Have you ever tried to call somewhere and they'd be like, well, due to COVID-19, that we have experienced a shortage of people and all that stuff. And it's just like you said, it's like, hold on. You mean to tell me it took you, we've been in this for 9 months. I understand the first 2 months, the first 4 months, even 5 months. But how are you going to still use that same philosophy and apply it? And I said that as irony to the fact is that our infrastructure, more than anything, has to be set in place that God forbid something happens like this again. How is your company, the government, whatever it is, going to adapt? And like you said, if you didn't take anything from what happened here in 2021, then I think, one, you put your blinders on and you just didn't want to see it. And then 2, it's like, you must have been asleep that whole time. You had to be in a coma. You woke up and forgot about everything that could have happened.
I think I agree with everything that you said. This is a new world, and no different than after 9/11. There were some things that, as time went on, maybe got a little looser and a little easier. But there were also some things that fundamentally changed forever.
Yeah.
And I think of travel as the easiest example of that. Pre 9/11, you never imagined you had to take your shoes off.
Mm-hmm.
Post 9/11, everyone said this is crazy. And now we take our shoes off. That's just the way it is. And we move on.
Yes.
And we are better for it, and we're safer for it. And, you know, I hope and pray that whatever evolves out of this last experience that remains permanent for the betterment of all of us, for our health and for our safety.
Well, for everybody that's new to the channel, one thing that we do on the Virtual Smoke Day, this is a podcast where we mix cigars and business. We try not to be like your typical, Herfs or your cigar podcast. We're going to talk a lot about business. We're going to talk a lot about things that economically has affected either one of us. But more importantly, it allows us to dive deeper into those actual conversations that you would normally have over a cigar in a cigar lounge. You know those very well. Those conversations could get really, really deep, and you never have a clue of who you're talking to until you have that conversation.
As I've done more and more of these types of events, it's always funny when I go back upstairs to rejoin my wife and my family, and it's been, 2.5 hours. My wife is in marketing and communications. She thinks of interviews and things like this as a 30-minute engagement.
Right.
And what I always remind her of is, if we were actually doing this in person, in a shop, in a lounge, it would be 4 hours that would go by like that. And that's just us. That's how it goes. That's our business. I'm looking forward to it. We have plenty to dive into. So
yes,
I'm all yours, my man.
So first and foremost, we're gonna go ahead and answer Allison's question. She said, "What wine is behind you right now, Michael?"
Truth be told, I have never disclosed it, but both of those are actually dummies. But they are dummies of Schrader. And Fred Schrader, who owned Schrader Cellars up until maybe 3 years ago, is a dear friend of mine. And I've traveled with him. He's a great cigar smoker, makes some really sensational wines. And I've been lucky enough to taste them and collect some over the years. And in 2012, I did a cigar project with him under the Schrader label, just as I was entering Nat Sherman. And then we did another one in 2015, maybe something like that. And we used these dummies in the store as display to help show and sell the product. So I brought the dummies home, and they look a hell of a lot better behind me than they do, anywhere else, as far as I'm concerned. But The good news is I do not have magnums of Schrader standing upright on my back bar. They are safely in the cellar where they belong. These are purely just for fun. And then I've got some cool, old vintage bottles back there.
Yeah.
Of spirits that were actually from my mother-in-law's wedding, funny enough. So I think they're really all just for show and for fun. But I'm not short on available drinking. I've got plenty. Actually, I just opened a bottle of that. I'll share that with Allison. And for those wine folks out there, for me, this is one of the greatest values, hidden secrets that there is. It's a Rhone-like blend. It's from Lafarge. Lafarge in general makes unbelievable stuff and also unbelievable value. And so that tends to be one of my favorite go-tos, especially for podcast wine.
So speaking of wine itself, right? Obviously you're red wine, but what is your go-to wine that you prefer, regardless of really what cigar that you're smoking? What is like your go-to wine?
That's a very difficult thing to answer.
It is.
No different than what's my go-to cigar.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the curses that comes with developed palates, and I think a lot of people don't give themselves enough credit when they say, I don't have a developed palate. I think more of us have developed palates than we're willing to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
that is evidenced by the fact that we select different things in different moments.
Mm-hmm.
That level of discretion supports the idea that our palates are developed far beyond what we may actually recognize. So I would say that I've got go-to styles and some go-to producers. Like, for example, this Miraflor is a go-to for me. Lately, I have veered away from what I used to really enjoy, which was the really fruit-forward, alcohol-heavy Napa cabs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone more to a little bit of the old world. So a little bit softer, lower alcohol, a little bit earthier, more complexity, less obvious, but not exclusively red by any means. So there are some great rosés from Provence and from Italy and from Spain. There's wonderful white wines that, for me, as long as there's body and presence, they can sit adjacent to or on top of a cigar.
Yes.
So big body, big mouth feel whites like Burgundies and Bordeaux's, and even some of the Napa Chardonnays, Sonoma Chardonnays, those will all go great. But I'll also say, frankly, if it's a hot summer day and I want to pound some Pinot Grigio or Bud Light, there is no better pairing on a hot summer day than a Pinot Grigio or a Bud Light. It's just the way it is.
And honestly, I tell people all the time, like, when Dapper D's open, we're open at the end of the month. We're a beer and wine establishment outside of everybody that doesn't live in Florida that own business. It's ridiculous to get a liquor license out here unless you have a large, substantial amount of money. Then it's very hard to start off with a liquor license or a big enough space to fit in 150 people. But as I was thinking about the idea that I was developing the project, I realized that a lot of people don't understand how well wines as well as beers complement cigars outside of, just your bourbons, your whiskeys, and all that. Yeah, those are go-to ones, and those are great, depending on the occasion. But if you're not trying to really, catch a buzz or anything of that nature, a wine, a great red, a great Pinot, a great Cabernet is really freaking phenomenal, even with your more full-body cigars.
Allow me to support that even further, because I'm a big believer in that. When you think of pairing in the greatest culinary sense, it is generally always accompanied food and wine. Mm-hmm. I've been to some whiskey dinners, but some of the greatest whiskey dinners I've been to have always served wine with dinner. That's not to say that you can't enjoy a spirit or a cocktail with food, but there's a difference between simply enjoying versus truly pairing. The challenge with pairing with high alcohol spirits, whether you're pairing with food or you're pairing with cigars, is the dominance of the spirit. And generally that comes from the alcohol. Yes. And when you're pairing a premium cigar with a high alcohol spirit, more often than not, let's say you take a puff of your cigar and you follow that by a sip of whiskey, more often than not, the flavor of the premium cigar that's left, that wonderful, delicate, nuanced finish, is replaced by the flavor of the spirit. So I would encourage folks who do really want to pair with spirits to taste the spirit first and layer the smoke above it. That will allow those flavors to marry in a more meaningful way. But frankly, I would tell you to really explore beers and wines. You're talking about alcohol that really does not exceed, even at the highest Australian levels, of 15%, maybe 16%. And the same with some of the very, imperial style beers. And so in those alcohol levels, you are really allowing flavors to marry. And then I would simply say to consider the cigar the food. And in that case, in food, we generally consider fat. So if we're considering fat, the reason we historically put fish with white wines and red meat with red wines is because it's the easiest rule to follow for the most common denominators of elegance and graceful fish cannot possibly compete with high tannin wines. But we know today, as our palates have developed and our minds have opened, that in fact, there are plenty of wonderful red wines that are low in tannin, low in acid, light in body, that pair wonderfully with a delicate fish. And there are also incredibly monstrous white wines that are bold and big enough to compete against the fat of a big marbled Wagyu.
Yeah.
And I really think that same principle applies if you consider the fat factor and you replace food with cigar, then you consider what you're up against with the cigar. Is it big, bold, earthy, and chewy? Is it a light Connecticut wrapper that is already a bit drying on the palate? And then you can fill in the blanks and say, okay, this is a very light wrapped Connecticut wrapper. I know that that cigar is going to be a bit drying, a bit astringent. Therefore, I am not going to select a wine that is tannic. I'm going to select a wine that's juicy and unctuous. Mm-hmm. And then quite the contrary, if you have a big, bold, full cigar that makes your mouth water, then you would want to select perhaps a big Napa Cab that is tannic, that does have some of that drying effect to create the same dialogue that you would create if you were sitting down having a meal.
And I'm so glad that you took the time to express that, because a lot of people don't understand it in that magnitude to that point. It's just like everything that you just broke down is just like cigars in a sense where they try to say a Connecticut is always a mellow body or a light, medium, whatever body, versus the fact of the matter is all the barriers on that stuff is being broken daily. I mean, you have legitimate connoisseurs trying to take those stereotypes and throw them out the window and change our whole palate. Just like you said, a lot of people don't know more Connecticut cigars are dryers. And then a lot of people don't know too that the more full body or bolder your cigar is, and the higher the alcohol content, the drier your palate gets. The drier your palate get removes the ability to really taste those notes in those cigars. So I mean, you just dropped a whole bombshell, and I hope you guys, really took that in, because that was deep. One of the questions that Rodney has, and then we're gonna go, like, we are almost 30 minutes into it, and we haven't even got to the point where who is Michael? You know what I mean? But we're gonna go ahead and answer this question right here. Are there any rules considering chilled versus room temperature when pairing with the wines?
As long as we're talking about the temperature to enjoy, not the temperature to store. Mm-hmm. So obviously to store, chilled is important.
Yes.
We need to keep the wine sound. Temperature to enjoy is really up to you. I'm not a wine expert. I'm a wine drinker and a wine lover. What I would say, though, is much like a cigar can develop start to finish, there is a lot of opportunity for wine to change in a glass. Mm-hmm. And I find some of the most dynamic changes happen not only with just the wine in the glass, but also as the temperature of the wine goes from cellar temp up to room temp. I think there's a lot of evolution that occurs. So I personally prefer serving wine colder in the beginning.
Yes.
In order for it to come to room temperature, as opposed to starting too warm. It's very difficult to chill a wine after the fact. And frankly, I'm too impatient and I drink too fast. So I would much prefer that we are chilled. And then there are a number of things you can do to help gracefully increase that temperature. Absolutely. If you need to.
And dead spot on. And Rodney, I hope that really answered your question, because like he said, it's really based on, a preference in a sense. Obviously, you want to store wines at a really cooler temp than obviously room temperature 70, 69, whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure that you store those a lot cooler and serve them to be able to adapt properly to the room temperature and the ambient temperature in the space.
Same principle applies, of course, to cigars.
Yes.
So there is a temperature and humidity that's appropriate to enjoy them, but there's also a temperature and humidity that's appropriate to store them. And
Yes.
when we think that what's been repeated over and over is this idea of 70 degrees, 70%, 70 degrees, 70%. I will tell you, like with wine, the colder something is kept, the slower the maturation and aging process.
Yeah.
The warmer it gets, the more radical change occurs faster. So I actually prefer to keep cigars around 60 degrees and 60 to 65% over long term. And then maybe move them if I'm going to open up a new box as a go-to cigar, then I would put those in a desktop that is room temperature 70 degrees and 70%. But I find that the changes that occur through aging in those slightly cooler and slightly drier conditions allow the maturation and evolution of flavor of aging to occur ever so slightly slower than higher temperature and certainly higher humidity. But of course, it also depends on where you live. It depends on what you have available for storage, not just for how you store them, but then also how you consume them. For example, I'm in the Northeast. I will never light a Cameroon wrapped cigar outdoors from November to March because that wrapper is so thin and so fragile that the moment you walk outside and it's so cold and so dry, I can hear them crack in my pocket before I even introduce heat that would cause them to expand. So it also, of course, depends on where you live. It depends on the available storage and resources that you have. 70-70 for cigars, there's nothing wrong with it. But being able to really control that a little bit more, I think would improve your hobbyist level.
Yes. Speaking of that, we made a video not too long ago about Boveda, and how I'm not really saying I disagree with Boveda, but I don't agree with the aspect of seasoning your humidor to Boveda itself. And what I mean by that is when you season your humidor based on a high input and output of a package, you're really not able to effectively control that humidity and that temperature. Well, obviously temperature is based on, the temperature around it, but you're not really able to control that humidity as accurate as if you was to go more traditional style, more old school, the sponge, the shot glasses, and different things of that nature. What's your outlook on that one?
So I am a huge fan of Boveda.
Yes.
I believe in the product. I think it has revolutionized our ability to control what has historically always been a constant ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. Spike humidity, dry out. Fill it up. Spike humidity, dry out. I think Boveda has absolutely changed the game for consistency as it relates to humidity.
Yes.
As it relates to seasoning, I have seasoned with Boveda. And the concept is correct. I don't disagree that there is just something a bit more convincing about the old school wiping down of an interior. But the other thing, frankly, is the way we store cigars today is so different than it was. It is perfectly fine to store cigars in Tupperware.
Yes.
It's perfectly fine to store cigars in zipper bags. All of those things are perfectly fine. The reason they weren't fine is because you couldn't control the output of humidity in a completely sealed environment.
Yeah.
And so that caused mold and all kinds of other problems. But for example, with a 65% Boveda pack, as long as you oversupply for your vessel meaning that you're putting enough packs in to oversupply where it's not constantly putting out humidity and then in a constant state of drying. Boveda rules. And in all of those environments, there's absolutely no seasoning necessary whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So if you look at Boveda's humidor, it's an acrylic humidor. It's non-porous. It requires no seasoning. It takes humidity the moment humidity is introduced to the environment. And I think that's tremendous. So if you have a traditional, traditionally cedar humidor, I would agree with you that it makes me feel better to do the old school seasoning. I know the humidity is there. I can see it climb. I know that it's done, and I don't have to guess.
Yes.
I prefer a traditional seasoning method for a traditional humidor, but then regardless of seasoned vessel, whether it's already seasoned by virtue of its material or whether it's now seasoned because of your traditional wipe-on shot glass method, I don't think there is anything more successful for consistent humidity and storage than Boveda.
Well, you guys heard it here from Michael itself.
And they don't pay me. I'm not in their ads.
Most definitely.
But I said now, because as it turns out, I've got a rather significant cigar collection now at home that I've never had to store at home before. So now I'm a firm believer in Boveda. What's up, Pete?
Man, most definitely. And that's exactly how it is that I explained it. Some misconstrued and different things of that nature, but I am a firm believer. If you're going to go Tupperware and Ziploc bags or, travel humidors or whatever the case may be, then you need to have a Boveda, a water pillow, a humidipack, something in there to control that environment as it fluctuates from either traveling or, your temperatures in your house fluctuates based on the seasons. Humidity fluctuates based on, how humid it is outside versus how humid it is in your house. So
the other thing I will say though, premium cigars, particularly those with thicker wrappers, are much more resilient than we give them credit for. And I saw Pete Johnson say hello, and I know he would attest to this. As much as we try and advocate for proper storage, proper humidity, the reason we advocate so fiercely is just to drive home the point that it's our responsibility as retailers and as consumers to try and preserve the intention of the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
However, a humidor should not be something that you lose sleep over. A cigar on your dresser for 3 days does not need to go through some significant reconditioning process. I've found cigars in my glove compartment, and I'm like, you know what? I feel it. It's good enough. Cut it up, rock and roll. Yeah. So it's just not something that we should really be consumed by or paralyzed by, but it is something that we just need to make sure that we pay attention to, because ultimately we never want to do anything to alter the manufacturer's intention.
Yes, they're spot on. And we're gonna kind of switch gears here, because I believe that conversation was freaking phenomenal. I think we learned a lot about wine as far as Boveda. Excuse me. People get you on that one.
Say it both ways. That way people know what it is.
Exactly. Hey, so Michael, obviously we didn't dove into this conversation. And we really haven't been able to hear your story. What was the thing that brought you into the cigar industry, into the whole enthusiast part of this industry?
So I'm a drummer by trade. I went to music school in Boston. Never smoked in my life. I'm a lifetime asthmatic. And I happened to be walking through Boston with my college roommate, Chris Brown, who may or may not be watching tonight, but he usually does chime into these things.
The dancer.
The other Chris Brown. The real Chris Brown. The real Chris Brown.
The real Chris Brown. Shout out to Chris Brown.
and we happened to walk by a cigar bar, and I said, wow, this is, well, he actually said, let's go in and have a cigar. And I said, this is crazy. First of all, I don't smoke. Second, I have no money. I mean, none of this makes any sense at all. But we ended up walking in, and I've talked about this part on a million podcasts, so I won't bore people who have seen this story. And if you haven't seen it, go watch another podcast and you can get the whole story. Nevertheless, I fell quickly in love with cigars. And as an artist and as a musician, that tends to be our personalities. When you find something that you're interested in, that really strikes you in a meaningful way, you tend to go down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
What I also realized quickly was, as a musician, I couldn't afford this hobby that I had just discovered, and so back then, I joked with Will Cooper the other day. Back then, the only way to get cigars at discount or for free was to work in retail. Now you can be a blogger because everyone wants it for the samples. That's obviously just a joke. But so I ended up getting a job in retail while I was, it was the end of my freshman year in college. And I worked retail all the way through college. I moved to New York City in 2002 as a musician and got hired at the Davidoff store on Madison Avenue as a retail sales associate. The general manager at the time I knew from Boston, and he was gracious enough to give me a shot and hire me on Madison Avenue. So I was 22 when I started there. So my first job, I was 19, just to put some dates. 1999, I was 19. 2002, I moved to New York and started working at Davidoff at 22. When I was 26, Davidoff bought what was at that time a franchised Davidoff store on the west side of Manhattan. And so they bought it from the franchisee and they moved me there as general manager. So that was 2006. And then in 2008, my predecessor at Davidoff, Madison, who hired me, left for another opportunity. And so they created a new role for me to run both Davidoff stores. So that was 2008. So I was 28. And then in 2011, I was recruited by the Sherman family to join their family business. And that was it was such a unique opportunity because of what the proposition was, that it was not just retail, but in fact was really to kind of prop up and redevelop the retail business, which is now, I think, pretty well known as the Townhouse, but equally important to resurrect and restore the premium cigar brand, which at that time was specifically Nat Sherman. Now, fast forward in 2017, Altria acquired Nat Sherman's total company, which included our cigarette business, and obviously they acquired us for our cigarette business. But with that transaction, of course, came our premium cigar business. So we spent that year rebranding our brands to put what had become our principal brands on top, and then to move Nat Sherman International, which was our company name, just to sort of an umbrella position, which was a very, very successful transition from a rebrand standpoint. And then we grew that business really all the way through 2019. And my role through all of that, I mean, you asked me sort of what motivated me and what brought me in. Throughout all of that, it was really, when I joined the company 2011, we were 81 years old. And premium cigars were the first product that ever had the words Nat Sherman on them. It wasn't until the 1950s that cigarettes then joined the portfolio. But through the cigar boom, which was very difficult for everybody, and given the success of the cigarette business, the Nat Sherman cigar brand, and again, I say Nat Sherman at that time, really just sort of gracefully faded. It didn't die a painful death. It just sort of gracefully faded and really became the house brand of the store for many, many years. The proposition in 2011 was to change all of that, was to restore the premium cigar business to a place of prominence, and help really close the gap in the timeline from when Nat Sherman's premium cigar business was high to obviously it experienced a bit of a dip, and then to restore it to that high again. That was just a challenge and an opportunity I couldn't possibly pass up. And it's one I look back at now with tremendous pride because we did everything that we set out to do. It was interesting in the early days, we were fighting against the current perception of brand. And so the current perception of brand in 2011 was that we were kind of a dusty brand, and we had been discounted for many years in catalogs. That was a very difficult barrier to push through. What I didn't consider, though, was that every day, starting in June 11, 2011, when I joined the business, was every day a new cigar enthusiast was learning about us and only discovering us in that moment. And so their perception didn't carry with it any of that baggage. And I've said this before, but it's worth it for the benefit of the audience and for you. My greatest inspiration was Cadillac. If you think of Cadillac in the early days of the 1900s and through the 50s and 60s and 70s, Cadillac was the American luxury automobile, period, full stop. However, in the 80s, Cadillac was brutal.
Yes.
Now, I only started recognizing cars in the 80s. So I remember seeing these weird little boxy cars with Christmas wreaths on the front, thinking, who on earth would drive this Cadillac? I thought it was awful. It didn't mean anything to me because it only resonated with my perception of the brand in the moment, not understanding the history. But then came Escalade, and then came the CTS, and then all of a sudden this new evolution of Cadillac came into play where the immediate perception of Cadillac and its brand changed. So much so that the 80s hoopties are now throwbacks that people kill to get.
Yes.
That's what we achieved with our cigars.
Yes.
We took it from being tired and sleepy to bringing it back to a place of prominence and relevance. And, unfortunately, circumstances are what they are today, but we restored the brand to a place of prominence and a place in history where you look at that trajectory, climbing, dipping, and then rising up again to the top. That's something that I'm so proud of. And all the people that it took to do that, our salespeople, our manufacturing partners, customer service, finance support, everybody was in it to win it. And we did it.
One thing about all of that, right? I know you've told that story a 1,000 times, but the reason I asked the question wasn't to hear, oh, what was the history of, Michael Herklots? What got you into? No, I didn't do that. My point of it was you found a man that had another passion, that experienced cigars, that became his passion, and was given opportunities like no other to go ahead and pursue his new profound passion. But the thing about the cigar industry that I think is kind of crazy is if you didn't grow up in it, then it's kind of, you already started as a disadvantage. If you didn't see tobacco fields in your backyard as a kid, then it's like you don't have a clue what you're talking about when it comes to cigars. Now, you took on Nat Sherman when I think let me not get it straight. I mean, excuse me. Do not let me get it wrong. But I believe the first cigar that Nat Sherman International acquired was the Epica.
So in Spanish, it's pronounced Epoca.
Yeah.
Us gringos generally say Epoca. So we'll do that just like Bovida and Bovita. It doesn't make a difference. As long as you buy it, who cares?
And oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So that brand was the first brand Nat Sherman, the man, owned before Nat Sherman became a brand. So before Nat Sherman was even a store, Nat acquired a cigar company called Schwab Brothers and Bear in the late 1920s that was based in New York City. The Epoca brand was the brand made in that factory. As time went on, Nat wanted to grow the Nat Sherman brand, not the Epoca brand. And so that brand ultimately went away.
Yes.
When I learned that story, we put a watch on the trademark. And then as soon as that trademark became available, which was around 2013, it had been abandoned. We grabbed it and then reintroduced it 2014, I think.
And the Epoca stand for time in actual English. So it's just funny that from that brand that has been acquired so long ago and went through a revolution for that matter, and it became into what we know Nat Sherman International to be now, like the timeless brand, the Supremes, the different things of that nature. What was the actually before we get to that point? Let's hit back on this point where this is a guy that came not from the tobacco fields, but went in and really renovated the cigar aspect of Nat Sherman International. And then, you guys came up with the partnership, and don't let me misquote it, but if I understand it in my perspective, it was y'all partnered with Palencia.
So let me backtrack for a second.
Okay.
Prior to me joining, there were still Nat Sherman cigars out there, and they were made by a lot of different factories. One of them was the Quesada family, and I had been very close with the Quesadas for many, many years while I was at Davidoff. When I joined Nat Sherman, and it was really time to start thinking different, doing new things, I suggested the Quesada family. I didn't realize that the Shermans had dealt with the Quesada family for so long. And so that was the perfect first step to really restoring and resurrecting Nat Sherman's cigar business.
Absolutely.
Timeless Dominican was the very first new product that I brought to market. And we did that the very end of 2011, 2012 with the Timeless collection from Dominican Republic. During that same time, let me back up again. One of the other factories that the Shermans dealt with for many, many years was also the Eiroa family, which was Camacho prior to Camacho selling to Davidoff. However, after Davidoff purchased Camacho, the Shermans continued that relationship. Now, lo and behold, I had just left Davidoff after 9 years. And so walking into this job, I already had two incredibly close and intimate relationships with Nat Sherman's current manufacturing partners, Quesada and Davidoff. But we also knew that we had to be able to expand and put multiple eggs in multiple baskets, not just for continuity of business security, but more importantly, for breadth of experience for consumers. And if you go back in the history books and understand 2011, Nicaragua was on a very, very steep increase in total contribution to the American market. And so that was a flavor that we really, we had to make sure that we could capture provenance from Nicaragua. I had known the Plasencias. I did not have a tremendous relationship with them, but the Quesadas certainly did. And so it was the Quesadas that put me in touch with the Plasencias within my first 30 days and said, this is somebody you need to know, someone you can trust, and someone you need to help. And God bless the Plasencias, they did. And so we started working with the Plasencias at around the same time, early 2011. We ultimately brought our first Plasencia made product to market in the summer of 2012. which was the Timeless collection from Nicaragua.
And you know, a lot of people don't. They may have known that backstory, but that a lot of people don't really understand how that transition actually happened. And it's just funny. The part I really want to get into is you went from Epoca, that means time, to a new brand or a new wave that is timeless. What was the transition? What was the mental thoughts that came to mind when you said, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to go pitch this new brand.
So you're connecting the dots really unbelievably, but let me correct the timeline.
Okay.
Because Epoca wasn't even in consideration.
Okay.
As we were developing Timeless. Timeless came out of two things. Number one, it was trying to understand what was the most iconic about our brand. And the things that were the most iconic visually was the clock and Indian logo that was both above our store and on many of our cigars at that time. But we also realized that the way that logo was positioned on the band with all these other things, the most important thing ended up being, in fact, the hardest to see. And so part of the evolution of Timeless's design was to zoom in on the most important thing, which was the clock. And turn that into what ultimately is referred to as a watch face. And you're right to consider that, because that was the inspiration for the Timeless band. The idea of timeless, though, was every time we would go down this rabbit hole of what is Nat Sherman? We were from the 30s, but it was 2011, and we were still, to a large degree, relevant, particularly for people in New York. We had experiences that we had maintained for over 20 years with the Casadas and with the Aroas, ultimately Davidoff, in our Metropolitan series. And yet, as sort of not old, but as traditional as those experiences were, they remained our best sellers. Mm-hmm. And so there was something about this idea that despite the moment in time we are in, Nat Sherman was going to always be relevant. And so we put a board up and we were putting all these words up and trying to come up with ways to evoke this sense of timelessness of the brand, to which ultimately just led me to Timeless. That's it. Why would we call it anything else? It's Timeless. By the time we got Epoca back, once we looked it up and really tried to understand the meaning, the literal translation is era, E-R-A, which I had a hard time reconciling in my brain what that meant. And so when I was in Dominican working on this, and I said Epoca, and they corrected me and said, it's Epoca. And I said, okay, great, but what does it mean? And they said time. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That's tiempo. There's lots of words that mean time. And then we really got it down to a moment in time, which is what made the translation of era make sense to me. Epoca is a moment in time. And so what I've loved about that is every moment you enjoy a premium cigar, particularly an Epoca, is an Epoca. It's a moment in time that will never, ever be repeated. By the time that cigar is gone, you can smoke another one, and you can smoke another one, and you can smoke another one. And even though the cigars are the same, and even though they're consistent, the moment in time can never, ever be the same. So it's a very, very powerful word that I think, to your point, really connects back to timeless.
Yeah. And right, that is exactly what I wanted to hear. And it's funny that, you know, what a lot of people don't really see is that majority of things that you smoke has a direct correlation to something Spanish meaning that goes deeper, right? Everything that you see in life or you experience in life is always a way to dive deeper. And it's like you dove deep into that. So diving deeper into, your time with Nat Sherman International, what was the hardest part of coming in and trying to revamp this seemingly older way of thinking when it came to the premium cigar aspect to it?
Let me pause and go back for 1 second, because you referenced this idea of things having this sort of Spanish meaning, Spanish origin, and then diving deeper into the origin. Mm-hmm. But you also said earlier that unless you were born in a tobacco field, you've got a significantly larger uphill climb.
Yep.
And that may have been true 30 years ago. I think it's less true today, because I think as people have evolved in our industry, what's so special about our industry is the openness and willingness to welcome passion. Mm-hmm. And so we had Pete on earlier. I don't know if he's still on. What better example of a guy that did not grow up in a tobacco field and that doesn't look like he grew up in a tobacco field, covered in tattoos, and an incredible bass player, from New England who lives in LA.
Yeah.
And yet he was welcomed with open arms because of his profound passion for the industry. And with that passion, equally important, humility and willingness to learn.
Yeah.
That recipe of personality is what has allowed so many others to gain success. Rocky, Jonathan Drew. There are so many folks who have, even Lito Gomez, let's not forget. Lito didn't grow up on that horse.
Come on.
Lito ran a jewelry store until it got boosted, and he said, to hell with this, I'm going to find something else to do. But the humility and willingness to learn will find endless open arms to welcome you.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to say that, because I think there are as many Epoca-like stories as there are to Liga Privada stories and Tatuaje stories and Illusione stories.
Come on.
And Alec Bradley story. These stories that you can go down, they all have rich meaning. They're all rooted in something that is deeper and worth investigating the story. I think the good news is they're no longer rooted solely in Latin history.
Yes.
They now live in American history.
Yes.
And I think that's something very special.
And speaking of American history, like how cigars swept, and I tell people all about the story, like when cigars really swept America, and how it's diving more into diversity of men and female, or men and women for that matter. You have a lot more women smoking cigars than men, per se. But it shows how it kind of evolves. And the one thing I noticed about the cigar industry, a lot of people like to go to Cuba, try to go into the Cuban roots. And what a lot of people can't, overlook is the American aspect, or the American stronghold it has into developing the industry into a way that it is evolving today. Even a way that it evolved Nat Sherman, going from, cigarettes, which it was a very lucrative business pitch, a very, very lucrative business model. And they decided that, hey, we're gonna take this step into this cigars, because cigars are really becoming something, versus back what it was in the 1930s, where it was more of a luxury item, versus now where it's more of a hobby. It is just crazy how it changed. And you got to see it kind of firsthand, from the change aspect from 2011 to 2020. You know, I made a video about the news when it broke of Nat Sherman going away and the Timeless brand going away and the Metropolitan Metropolitan going away. And you know, those are reactions that, you know, true enthusiasts from back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and even the 80s didn't quite understand. But here in 2020 anything, or 2010 anything, we realized the actual efforts and the quality that we got versus the quantity. You know, Nat Sherman International didn't have a bunch of releases and a bunch of different lines of cigars, but those ones that they had was quality products. And I think that's kind of a game changer when you look at it from, you know, a standpoint. I didn't realize that was Pete. I believe that's Pete from Tatuaje, correct?
Yeah.
So yeah, he doesn't have a photo, so I didn't realize it was Pete from Tatuaje. Thanks for tuning in, Pete. We deeply appreciate everything that Tatuaje has, and like you stated, when, you know, everything in the industry is developing, you know, everything is coming from the traditional aspect and going into the hey, you're an enthusiast and you're passionate about this, let's give an opportunity to build your brand. You know, I couple of weeks back in 2020, we had Matt Booth from Room 101 on, and you know, he was part of the Tatuaje class. He was part of your class coming into, you know, the cigar industry and revamping. And you know, Drew Estate was, and Alec Bradley was, and a lot of people don't know that. They look at these names and be like, oh, well, they've been here forever. These guys came from the trenches. They came from the mud, and to create these brands and market them in the way that they are. So, you know, biggest thing is that I have to say is, you know, that is a remarkable story. And I think it's even crazier how in depth you got of that story. I don't recall seeing too many interviews where you're able to actually get into depth of, you know, your Timeless, the Epoca, the Epoca brand and all that stuff. And I think that is freaking phenomenal that you were able to dive deep into that.
One thing that's worth, I think, pointing out is the evolution of our brand and our company had to be done in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. So as much as we were trying to change perception of the brand starting in 2011 to make it relevant, what made us relevant was our authenticity of being a brand since 1930.
Yeah.
And so our approach to launches, for example, was a much more disciplined approach than perhaps other of my peers who joined the business at a time where new was a very important model.
Yes.
And so you mentioned Matt, who's one of my, Matt and Pete are two of my dearest friends in this business because I knew them both when they were trying to sell their first cigars. And the same with Rocky and the same with Jonathan. And I look at their success today, and you take those four examples, Rocky, Jonathan, Drew from Drew Estate,
yep,
Pete and Matt Booth. They could not be more different characters. They couldn't have more different models. But what makes them so, what brings them together is the four of them had a humility and willingness to learn and an endless drive to be successful.
Yes, come on.
And I will tell you, one of the things that bothers me most is when I hear people speak about Rocky and Drew Estate in the context of big company.
Come
and
on.
Even Pete sometimes. Now, today they are, but I knew them when they weren't.
Yeah.
And so what more do you want when you start a company than to grow it, than to have more and more people like your product, to have more and more retailers sell your product to more and more people who like it, and to grow the business and employ more and more people and bring more joy to more. That's the name of the game. It's to me, labeling, these companies as big companies and that they're not boutique anymore. You have to understand the origins. I would put Lido and LaFleur in the same place. You're talking about folks who in their heart of hearts are as boutique as it gets. And thankfully, they did their job well enough to grow to such a degree that new perception today lumps them in a class that is big. But I will tell you, their hearts are big.
Yes.
And their passion is big.
Come
as
on.
big today as it was then. You asked me what the hardest part was coming in and revamping this old brand. And it was finding our authenticity. This idea that we were competing in 2011, 2012, 2013 with all these other folks who were new, literally new, doing new releases and new things. And we had this identity crisis of we were almost new again, but we had to be true to our roots in being authentic to now being an 84-year-old brand, an 85-year-old brand, and being more disciplined about how we brought things to market, not bringing things to market that were limited to go in and go out. We brought things to market so that retailers had something to sell after they were out of the new thing. And that has always been core to our belief. And we did that really straight through the end. Of course, we did some limited editions and other things. But there was a bit of an identity crisis, I think, right to the end of, are we new or are we old? Are we hip and relevant, or are we your grandfather's cigar? Well, the fact is, we're timeless. We are all of them. We're as relevant today as we were then.
Yeah.
And to have that kind of discipline and not just bring things to market every opportunity, but really make sure that what we're bringing to market, we were bringing in order to maintain for years and years to come. That really is what led our charge. And I would say that we were as authentic to our pedigree as Pete Johnson is to his, as Matt Booth is to his, as Rocky is to his, and as Jonathan is to his. And I can go on and on and on because I admire and respect these folks, with everything. And Matt joined probably, I was at Columbus Circle, so probably 2006. So he came in the business longer than I did. Pete started retail before I did, but launched Tatuaje after I was already in the business. And, to see these guys, and even Rocky. Rocky used to come to our store in Boston, bootstrapping, even to New York at Davidoff, bootstrapping. But this guy was on the road 330 days a year, preaching his gospel, telling people why his products mattered and what was the proposition to buy it, and shaking people's hand and saying thank you. And as big as Rocky is today, he says thank you every moment he gets.
Yes.
And that's, at the end of the day, that is what counts, man. I mean, we have a lot of choices on what we spend our money on. It's nice to hear thank you. Mm-hmm. And I think the greatest in our industry remember to say thank you.
Yeah. And it's something, as we, you hit some notes, you hit some pinpoints that struck a vein in my heart. And the reason why I say it struck a vein in my heart is because we are doing this. I am you back in 2011. I am Pete back in, 2006, or even when he started. I am you guys, because right now, I think the retail business of it is harder to establish yourself versus a manufacturer that's trying to, introduce a cigar. And I say that because, you are going against, heavy hitters, top phenomena in that actual aspect that is doing great things, like Smokey. You're about to be a one of the main hosts on the Great Smoke. I mean, that is something that is unimaginable, you know, of something that Abe started in 1996 and, you know, is built it to this. You know, you talk about Jeff out in Corona Cigars, you know, started this company as, you know, just something, you know, back in the 19 I think it was 1999 when he started that. And or Cigar International, which now is a corporate entity of itself, you know, started this, and you got so many different ventures or different things that kind of goes back to them.
Let me tell you something, man. Cigars International one day opened a website. Abe opened one store. Jeff opened one store.
Mm-hmm.
Now you look at what they've built. They haven't built it because they were trust funds. They haven't built it because they acquired something bigger. Those folks built it day after day, hour after hour, believing that they could do something not only that was great for the industry, but that would make the industry better.
Yes.
And the greatest success stories in our industry, I believe, are when the players in whatever role, level, category, are when they have industry first. Your business will always win if you have industry first.
Mm-hmm.
If you have your business first, and then you're looking at your competition as targets, you will never grow the way these folks have grown. And Cigars International, they ultimately sold now, of course, to STG and General Cigar Company, but it didn't. General Cigar Company didn't start that.
Mm-hmm.
Two guys started that in Pennsylvania, and they grew it, and they took risk and they invested. But I will say, I don't know that I agree that retail is harder than a brand, because in retail, you are talking about, first of all, lower overhead, but more importantly, you have the ability to speak directly to the person who's putting that product in their mouth at the moment that they're doing so.
Mm-hmm.
That's a unique opportunity. And having spent the last 20 years in retail, there is no more powerful insight in the world and no more powerful advantage than being there at the moment that someone is doing something they can only do there with you.
Mm.
And that is experience your hospitality and expertise.
Yeah.
That, you know, as a brand, we tried to deliver that philosophy. We tried to partner with retailers who would carry on the same message, level of service that we did in New York. But we had to relinquish possession of that experience to partners.
Mm-hmm.
When you are in retail, that is no different than being in a restaurant and dropping the dish on the plate.
Mm.
You see the smile. You see it through to the end. The question is, what do you do with it as a retailer? Because if you think your job ends at the moment you have given them their change and their receipt, then you are sorely mistaken. But if you remain engaged with that person throughout the process, you remain engaged with that person, introducing them to other people who are in your store or lounge. You follow up to see how they enjoyed it. You empty their ashtray halfway through. You show them the respect that one could not possibly receive by clicking to buy. Retail is a profound advantage to connecting directly with a consumer.
And you know, I think from your perspective too, you got to see both of those. You know, you got the store, you had the brand, you ran the brand, and I think going into that, and Rodney, don't think we forgot about you. We're gonna get back into that, but there was some things that I want to dive in with him. but like you said, you got to see those from both angles. You got to see the retail side, you got to see the manufacturer side, and no shade or no degradation of any type to any manufacturers. I wasn't saying that when I said that. I know you definitely didn't take it that way, but I don't want anybody that watches later or watching now to think that is what I was conveying or the things that I was saying. But the thing about it is, from our perspective is when I say we are you, is we're trying to start a brand where, you have already some very known brands that you can go to. You have some very known brands that are out there that's been servicing since 1990 anything or 2000 and anything. And then you start getting into, something that was created in 2020 and, developed based off of the passion for the smoke. That is what our foundation is here at Dapper D's. Is we are developing something that I am passionate about. And when people have any type of anything wrong with it, I don't necessarily take it personal, but I take it to the heart, because my goal is to make sure that, just like the manufacturer our goal is to make sure that what we're putting out is reputable. What we're putting out is, long standing and longevity behind what it is that we're producing. So, and spot on with what you said is, when we decided that we were going to do this thing, it's a lot of passion behind it, but it was also a lot of, let's drive this to the way that we can ultimately make this successful by making sure that people are happy, first and foremost.
And ultimately, when you are connecting direct with that consumer, I mean, you think back to the guys that you referenced earlier, and I'll use Abe and Jeff, Smoke-In and Corona Cigars, incredible retailers. They didn't have the advantage that we have today, doing things like this and Facebook and Facebook groups and Instagram, ways to cast a wider net. The only way they could cast their net wider was to make sure that they were delivering experience that was deserving of repeating. That's it. Not only repeating for the consumer who experienced it, more importantly, for that consumer to repeat the story, for someone else to say, that sounds great, let me go and try it. That is really, as much as we want to do that on the brand side, the retail experience, the hospitality of retail, bringing joy at the moment they enjoy it, that's a very, very special and frankly awesome responsibility.
Spot on. I want to kind of change it. Usually we go an hour, but I'm not going to shortchange this. I think we're going in somewhere that is very deep. If you have to go, give me a signal, give me a sign, and let me know, hey, I got to go. I have a schedule. But one of those things that you mentioned is, our net, our ability to do this. A lot of people feel like I do, maybe my YouTube or my podcast to benefit them. This is more or less a benefit to the consumer. So when you walk into here, hey, I don't know how to cut a cigar. Well, I'm going to teach you, but just in case you forget, you can go watch this video. I would love to talk with, Michael Herklots, but just in case you never get to do that ever, you can go watch our podcast and see a deep, intimate conversation that really captures. It's all about capturing that in a perspective. And seeing the lounge in New York close, I always wanted to go there. I'm only 29, so when you talk about a 9/11, and when you talk about when you came into the industry, I was still barely getting off my mom's nipple. And excuse my French for anybody that doesn't like it, but I'm just being honest. I was barely getting off of that, and a lot of people don't see it. See my passion for what it is. My passion is deep rooted into cigars. So when it came to running the lounge and running the brand, what was things that mirrored itself that ultimately led to the success that you guys had either one of those ballparks?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, there was a time when I, Pete Johnson, and Matt Booth were the young guys in this business.
Mm-hmm.
And over drinks at trade shows, we would get our balls broken by guys like Carlito and George Padron, who would say there was a time when they were the young people in this business. And now you're telling me that you were on mom's nipple when I started in the business. Man, you know how to make a cat feel old, let me tell you.
I got you, Ron. Just give us a second.
What's been so interesting about my experience in retail is it was always attached to a brand. So I've always done what I would consider, except for my early Boston days, flagship retail, not just regular retail. Meaning not only was I proud to represent and carry all of the brands that I did, but more importantly, we had a role to prop up the brand that sat on the marquee of our building, Davidoff first, and then Nat Sherman. So that brings with it a different level of responsibility to what that experience really means. Mm-hmm. When I look at the things that set us apart, which I think is what you were asking, we really focused on who are we, what are we, and what are we not. And so to draw a contrast to your business, for example, in both of the retail businesses I ran in New York, we were never a lounge first. We had a lounge, but we didn't serve anything. We were not trying to get people to stay longer to buy more drinks or coffee or anything like that. And so we built our philosophies around service and experience of service, period, the end. And I think, although in hindsight, there were certainly some criticisms along the way, it was because we weren't delivering what every customer always wanted. And a lot of customers wanted a lounge. But if we started to ease up on our authenticity of our business model, then we start serving too many masters, and then there is no way to make that experience repeatable, both repeatable in its consistency of service and then repeatable that someone can tell the story of their experience, someone else can come in and experience exactly the same thing. I've always referred to that as a cycle of service. And there were times that customers thought that was too formal. And funny enough, I did a presentation last year, maybe the year before, about creating memorable retail experiences. And in both of those presentations, I walked through this idea of cycle of service. And in both of those presentations, I put up Google reviews and Yelp reviews and Facebook reviews of our business, showing all of the praise and criticism over exactly the same subject. For example, somebody follows you in the humidor everywhere you go. We took that as a point of pride. You deserve one-on-one service. Mm-hmm. And that's our responsibility. There were some people who liked it. There were some people who took offense to it. Mm-hmm. We weren't willing to change it because that's what made us authentic. It's what made us, frankly, better than anyone else. They only have 12 chairs on the main floor. That's correct. The other people said they have 12 chairs for you to sit in. It's all about perception. So the people that were upset I didn't have 25 thought that my 12 chairs were a disservice. For those who were so happy to have a place to sit, they took that as accommodation. And those types of things go on and on. But without getting like too deep into the specific nitty-gritty things, the things that we did, we made sure were memorable and repeatable. And I guess the third would be they could not be accommodated anywhere else. Specifically meaning, at this point in our lives, there is nothing we can't buy sitting on our toilet.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
Literally, nothing.
And so what makes somebody opt in to walk in our doors as retailers? If you as a retailer are seated in a chair next to your customers watching a movie, that's not what somebody opts in for when they walk in your business.
Yeah.
When they are greeted and made to feel warm and welcome rather than afraid to interrupt, you are creating these opportunities that are memorable, that cannot be accomplished online and cannot be accomplished even in some of your competitive stores, that they're not committed to that level of service. So that's the theme of what we did, both at Davidoff and at Nat Sherman. It's no secret, and I've talked about it for 20 years publicly. I guess the question is, who is willing to step up and do it, and who's not?
Yeah, that's spot on. So I want to get to these questions real quick. I have a couple more questions I want to ask you, but I want to get to what the viewers are asking. So Ron said, "Is there a glimmer of hope the Nat Sherman brand will ever see a resurgence somewhere down the line, or has the ember gone out forever?"
Let me start with the second part. The ember will never be out. And that's because, Rodney, guys like you have enjoyed our products for so many years, and hopefully you have some left, that ember will never go out. And that's a real point of pride for me, that our brands and our history are now in the history books. And will always be alive, I think, in people's memories of great moments spent with our products. So the ember's not out. As far as the hope of a resurgence, I just don't know the answer to that question. The way I can answer the question honestly is, we tried to conduct a transaction that met certain criteria. And ultimately, especially because of COVID, we were not able to execute the transaction that we wanted to transact. And so the result of that was our people got an incredibly generous soft landing. Our brands were retained, so they didn't end up in the hands of someone who would not honor the legacy of those brands, which was part of our mission in transacting in the first place. Now, that we can never say never. That is what it is. But based on the criteria of the transaction and the ultimate result of that transaction, it's where we are today. But I think, what I've been so encouraged by from the moment we announced that the transaction was not successful is just the overwhelming support of people sharing stories with the brands, posting photos of the brands. We were, for better or worse, we sold 6 months worth of inventory in 6 weeks. And that means that there's a tremendous amount of product that's available in retailers all around the country who are still able to provide that product to their customers. So the curtain has not fallen, despite the fact that our operations have ceased. The legacy will continue on. And I suppose if there comes a day when the final cigar is purchased, the ember continues to burn in the memories of people who counted on our products, whether it was retailers who sold our products, who supported it and made money and put their kids through college selling our products, whether it's consumers who celebrated a birth, celebrated, honored a death. Our products have been such a part of so many meaningful moments, so many epocas, like you said earlier, that I don't ever see a moment where that ember goes out.
and I look at the Nat Sherman brand, yes, it's dissolved into what it is now. But this is something that if you do have that product, if you do have boxes of cigars, if you do have individual cigars, you're not smoking on those like it's an everyday product that you can get. It's gonna come a time where having a Nat Sherman International, whether it's a Timeless, a Supreme, or Metropolitan, Epica, uh, anything like that, when you have those, you kind of cherish those. You kind of sit those in your humidor, and when it is time to have a special event, or it is time to have, this is a wow event or a wow day, you pull out those because, like you said, it's timeless. It's not something that you can just go into a brick and mortar lounge or an online retailer and just grab this product. I mean, even on the manufacturer or the wholesale or the manufacturer relationships, you can't just get these things, anywhere. You got to have special connections to be able to get to that inventory. So I think it's one of those things that is going to be more memorable than anything.
What I would say is buy what you can find. And, I get all day inundated with messages and direct messages and emails and text messages from consumers and retailers asking where they can find the product. The product's out there.
Yeah.
I would assume that the easiest places to find them may have sold out the first. Laura, I love Laura. She's bestcigarprices.com. Laura's another awesome story of someone. Look, Laura was not born in a tobacco field, right? Pull her back up. Laura Barlow was not born in a tobacco field, but she has made a career in this industry because she is passionate about it and she has the humility and willingness to always learn. That's the name of the game in this business.
And she's so, if you have a conversation with her, she's so deep, she's so personal. And, in this game, what I had to realize is, I was a veteran for 10 years. So when I got out of the Navy, I went into the cigar industry on the retail side of it. And one thing I noticed is the Navy would teach you to compete with people. And when I sit down and I speak with Laura on a Johnny Smokes Uncut Whereby, or, an interaction through a post or anything like that, I take it all in, because at the end of the day, we are not here to compete. We are here to legitimately do what we say we love to do, and that's cigar. Smoke cigars and have the conversations over it.
I made a note of something you said earlier. I always take notes when we do these things, so I want to make sure I don't lose stuff. You mentioned the word diversity. And if there's any takeaway of 2020 that is separate and apart from pandemic, even though there are plenty of issues related to the pandemic that I think drive directly to diversity, inequality, but notwithstanding that piece, there is no greater illustration of diversity than our industry.
Come on.
Especially when you look at the wholesale and the retail environment.
Yeah.
When you walk in, and everybody says this, but when you really understand the context of it today, what we used to say was you could walk into a cigar shop and sit down with the CEO and a bus driver. And what opportunity would that ever present itself other than a premium cigar shop or enjoying the hobby of premium cigars wherever you do?
Right.
But if you actually drill in today, 2020, in just how important premium cigars are to the Latin culture, the African American culture, female culture and empowerment, this is an industry that truly empowers people and truly brings people together with a commonality that no other social, racial, sexual, no other divide could possibly bring them together to, because it is the thing that you love. And we all love a lot of different things. And when you get into where I'm from and where you're from, and male, female, black, white, gay, straight, what we love goes all over.
Yeah.
And historically, we've always tried to live on the fringes of those. But in premium cigars, we love premium cigars.
Come on.
That is a togetherness that, when you think of what diversity means in America and how important it is moving forward, what better conduit to support diversity and inclusion than looking at our own businesses and looking at our own brands and looking at the things we do day in and day out and saying, am I open enough to women in my store?
Yeah.
Am I diverse enough in my membership? Do we have the right conversations? Are we making sure that we avoid areas where there's conflict? Listen, I think the only other commonality, and it certainly is not as diverse, unfortunately, is the service. But you talk about a common love and common commitment and devotion and passion, and I thank you for serving. This is it's not a love of country, but it is a love of hobby and passion that I think probably you have the same conviction for as the reason why you served. And it's probably why now in your post-service career, you've decided to pursue it, because it takes exactly the same passion and conviction. No difference than my transition from being a drummer to being in this industry. It took the same conviction and passion for taking something that I loved and being able to make a career out of it, not just to make a living, but to contribute in a meaningful way and help others find what I love about it. That's a very, very awesome thing to be able to do. And again, you and your retail business, in this podcast, you are doing that. But I did want to make sure I brought in that diversity piece, because we've always been proud of our diversity as an industry. But I don't think there is a moment where we could be more proud than we are today. I think there's obviously still a lot of work to do and a lot of road to travel. But I say this as a straight married white guy, so I understand my perspective is entirely privileged. But I do think that there is an opportunity that we all need to take to say, man, we have come a long way as an industry, and we can pave the way for a lot of other things moving forward.
And I want to just not only give you a round of applause for that, but I also want to say I have not heard it clearer. You know what I mean? You know, I run some big groups. I got a bigger group, and then I have Dapper D's group. And you know, one thing that I do not play is the political game or the racial tension game or anything of that nature. Because when you say you are a brother or a sister of the leaf, that means I don't care what you look like. We can have a conversation because of these things. You know, we can sit back and learn from each other. We can sit back and have those hard conversations that we probably would not have outside of this setting. And again, like you said, pave the way for what it is that we're trying to do, you know. And I think when it comes to the things that you said, you know, I think it's best to highlight the difference that we have. You know, I a lot of people don't know I'm half white, half black. You know, my mother is legitimately white. You know, when I have guests on, they're either black or white or Hispanic. It does not matter. I don't care. In the military, you know, we serve with one thing on my last ship. We used to have on the hangar bay doors, which if you're not familiar with the Navy terminology, a hangar is where the storage of planes and helicopters is. But we used to have the different diversities, the different countries that the members on that ship actually came from. You know, the purpose of it wasn't to signify or highlight them. It was to signify that at the end of the day, we're all one in the body, or we're all one when it comes to serving in the Navy, or we're all one when it comes to serving in the cigar industry or smoking cigars. And I think it's spot on. You know, we have to understand that our ability to control the narrative is there. It's just simply, do you want it?
But what I think is so tremendous about our industry and our hobby is we are going into the conversation, giving each other the benefit of the doubt, knowing that we want to come out of this conversation still friends.
Come on.
We're going to sit down again and smoke another cigar.
Absolutely.
That's going to happen. And so when you come into a conversation with that level of admiration and respect for each other over this thing as simple as a bunch of rolled up leaves,
that's touched by 300 hands,
there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Sorry, I went down. I'm coming back up.
Hey, so
you said diversity.
I did. I did. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, not to steer away from that conversation, but it's a sensitive one for some. Some aren't ready to partake in a conversation that talks about that. Some are. Some don't know that, you know, like you said, have privilege in it. So from different perspectives, people look at me. I don't get the benefit of the doubt. You know, I'm always classified as this African American male or whatever the case may be. But don't understand, when I have Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner, I'm sitting across from people that have different perspectives from me. And yet, like you said, they see it for who I am and what I am. And I will always tell people, I will sit here and tell you, you know, both perspectives. I can tell you from both perspectives what it is. And that's what it is. Gray Wolf. If you ever stop by the Johnny Smokes Uncut Whereby, man, they call him Great Cliff. Obviously, you know who Great Cliff is, but Gray Wolf says, "What's next for Michael?" That's definitely that you have to sip on before.
A lot more wine. That's what's next. You know, I've mentioned it before, and I've been very public because I think it's important that people understand this is not the way we expected this to play out.
Yeah.
Not the way Altria wanted it to play out, evidenced by the fact that they even allowed us to try and sell the business in the first place. If they wanted to close the business, they would have closed it in 2017 when they bought us. If it got too hard, they would have closed us in 2019 when they decided that there was no future for us. They didn't do any of that. In fact, they did the opposite and said, we want to find a place where this can live on, and we'll give you the benefit of the time to do it. And we did. And we were very, very close to being concluded with the transaction after months of work from October of 19 through March of 20. We were almost done. And then, unfortunately, pandemic hit. And as you can imagine, anybody who was in consideration to acquire our business was not sitting on their couch with a briefcase full of cash saying, man, I would love to buy a cigar business. Let's buy this.
Yeah.
Anybody who was going to buy our business was already in business. Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, the challenges that faced buyers when the pandemic hit were the same challenges that every other business hit. And that was, how do we fix our own business? How do we protect our own people? And unfortunately, we ultimately became a casualty of that. But even after the pandemic hit and we closed the store for quarantine, every employee was kept whole. Our people on the road that could no longer travel, everyone was kept whole, paid in full, kept employed with the promise of this transaction that we were still working tirelessly towards. It wasn't until ultimately July, when we had literally turned over every rock. We tried to make this deal happen a million different ways. And there was just criteria that we laid out, which is making sure it's a fair deal, making sure that it's the best outcome for our people, and making sure that the buyer is a good steward to carry on the legacy that we've spent 90 years to build. In the absence of meeting that criteria, we had to decide to close. The good news is after that every one of our people received a generous soft landing, and that includes me. So I've had the benefit now. My last day was November 15th. And I will tell you, growing a business is not easy. I never imagined that winding down a business would be as difficult as it was. It was a lot of work, but I'll tell you, we had a dedicated team right to the end, making sure that we did it right. We went out the same way we came in and grew the business. And so the good news is that with that sort of generous soft landing for people, that lets everyone really kind of take a deep breath and think about the timing. Some people, I think our first wave left September 30th. And then the rest of us, is that right? September 30th? Something like that. September 30th. Then the rest of us, November 15. That's not a really good time to get stressed out about looking for a job, particularly in a pandemic. The good news is everybody was given a soft landing, which gives everyone the benefit of time to figure out what's right. And, you know, personally, I couldn't be more grateful for that generosity and just having the time to really scrutinize every single opportunity, whether it's in industry, out of industry, what's the right thing for me, what's the right thing for my family, and to not feel the pressure of having to do that, you know, within 2 weeks has been really a blessing. So I've spent the holidays really enjoying them with my family, decorating the tree, hanging out with my kids. I would say historically, I haven't had time to hang out with my kids, but since I've been home for 7 months, I've had a hell of a lot more time than I've had over the last 10 years to spend with my family. So I will tell you what is next for Michael Herklots is the next right thing. And if I think of the few moves that I've made in my career, I left Boston, moved to New York. I worked for Davidoff. So that was 4 years in Boston, 9 years with Davidoff. And I didn't leave Davidoff until it was the next right thing. And that was this opportunity with Nat Sherman. And I stayed with Nat Sherman for 9 years, not because there weren't opportunities, but because it wasn't the next right thing. But you can rest assured, and forgive me, Gray Wolf.
Yeah.
Gray Wolf asked the question. Gray Wolf, you'll forgive me if I didn't directly answer it, but it's the most direct I can, which is, if this is chapter 3, chapter 3 is going to be written with a very strong beginning. It's going to make sense for me, and I can't wait. I can't wait for the next one.
Hey, you know, Mike, I don't think it was a better way to answer that question. You know, honestly, from my perspective is I can't wait to see what you have next. You know, a lot of people see it as, and one of my questions, I'm gonna be honest with you, for all my viewers, I made sure me and all our guests, but more or less than Mike talked about this, we are all organic here. I usually have questions just in case it falls off. I got to 2 of those questions out of this whole segment, which is perfectly fine with me. That's what I love. And I can only imagine what the news was. So I'm not even going to answer that. But, you know, from this industry, this is a traveling industry. This is an industry that requires you to move around a lot, to network a lot, to build a lot, and it puts a lot of strain on the the family strength that you have at home. If that is not already strong and is brittle or anything of that nature, when you start to go down that road, it'll just decay. It'll cave in, just like a roof with a whole bunch of water in. So I don't even want to ask you, how that took, but more or less kind of want to go into something else, but I'm going to let you respond first.
Well, let me respond quick. You just put a comment up from Justin. Justin is from my hometown in Northeast Connecticut, in the little quiet corner of Connecticut, and a great cigar smoker and a very active member of the cigar smoking community. So I want to give a shout out to Justin.
Shout out to Justin. Thanks so much for tuning in.
You are right. If it wasn't strong going in, it's very difficult to maintain the strength. Good news is my wife is awesome. My kids are awesome. And we're a solid team, and we support each other. My wife works hard. I work hard. I think we're both good at what we do. I think she's probably better at what she does than what I do, than I am at what I do. But I'll tell you, if we were talking before we were live about 2020 and the blessings and the curse of the year and what we take out of it. What I'm taking out of it, and I actually think a lot of my peers in the premium cigar industry are taking out of it, is really reassessing the priorities of what is most important. And that's not to say that my peers, or I for that matter, ever thought that anything was more important than our family. But I think we were hesitant to play the bet on whether we could skip an event, on whether we could do something virtually. But by and large, we as an industry have survived and thrived in this quarantine world.
Absolutely.
And we've done that by things like this. It's funny, I said to my kids before they went to bed, I call these show and tells so it makes sense for my kids. And I said, Daddy has a show and tell tonight. And they said, oh, are you leaving? And I said, no, Daddy's going to put on a suit and sit at the dining room table and do a show and tell instead.
Yeah.
And, is this more or less valuable? I think it's the same. I think there's been a lot of evolution in what experiences like this really mean and how to lay the bets appropriately to make sure that you have the best odds.
Mm-hmm.
I think I am not the only one of my peers that would say that as we move forward and return to normalcy, what will probably be the last to return is the road warrior life of being on the road, 5 days a week and seeing your family on weekends.
Oh.
Because I'll tell you, after I started home, I think around March 13th, and by April 13th, that was the single most consecutive nights I had my head on the same pillow in 15 years. And I shouldn't say that, maybe in 5 years. And by 3 months, it was certainly the most in 15 years. And, that's time that, you say you can never get the time back. I feel like to a large degree, I got some time back,
Mm-hmm.
In real meaningful moments, especially in really hard times, to just be together as a family and get through it and go through it. And we did it. We did it. And so, I know, of course, travel will return. I have to, eventually get back to work and get on the road and start doing things. But I'll also say that in the times that I was away, and I've said this to my wife multiple times, you will never see a picture of me without a smile on my face, because everywhere I go, in every country, in every city, I'm with people I love.
Yeah.
I'm with people who are friends, who support what we're doing, who I'm happy to see, whether I'm meeting them for the first time or seeing them again. And it's so magical to think that anywhere a plane can go, I've got a phone number to call and someone to have dinner with and someone to see and catch up with. So I am really looking forward to getting back to it once it's the right time to do it. But I'm certainly not in a rush to do it, and I'm certainly not in a rush to do it in the way that I was doing it before.
Come on. You know, speaking of the way you did it before, man, you just got invited to be one of the hosts of one of the biggest cigar events that I think is going to happen. Shout out to Abe and Smokey for the great smoke that they're about to put on. It's an 8-hour segment that is more of a QVC style. I'm interested to see how that goes, but you just been selected as one of the hosts. Regardless of the year that you had, you're very influential. And hands down, if things didn't transpire the way they transpired, I would see, Nat Sherman for the next 40, 50, 60 years for sure. How did that feel to be selected for such a historic show that's about to go down?
I've known Abe for, I don't know, 12, 15, probably 15 years. And Abe has always impressed me. We were on boards together, and he's always been a very gracious guy with his time, supportive of us with Nat Sherman. We've always just gotten along. I've always admired Abe for his relentless commitment to consumer experience and his relentless commitment to innovation. And if you look at 2020, you talk about people who have thrived. He thrived not because he had some secret recipe, but he realized he had customers and employees that were depending on him.
Come on.
And he canceled the 2020 Great Smoke. I think. I'm pretty sure that got canceled.
For 20, it did.
I think it did.
It was supposed to be an in-person event, and he couldn't do it.
Yeah, because it was right after Pro Cigar, and Pro Cigar happened, and then, kind of the shit hit the fan. Whether he did it or not, I guess doesn't make a difference. What I do know is that as pandemic hit, through all our conversations during that time, he was consumed with the responsibility of how do I deliver this event? And a lot of events have canceled. For Abe, canceling 2021 was not an option.
Come on.
And so he put his people to work and he invested his money and he came up with a plan. And so the bottom line is there is going to be a Great Smoke 2021, period, full stop. The plan is for it to be largely virtual with some in person. The plan as it stands today is that I'll be there in person in Florida to help support it. But what I said to Abe, and we had this conversation before we knew the results of the transaction, I said to Abe, look, number one, I may not have a company to represent when I'm there. And number two, I'm not even sure if I can get there depending on which way this goes.
Yeah.
And Abe, being the gracious guy he is, says, it doesn't matter. I want you to be a part of it. I need you to be a part of it. Be a part of it. Just say yes. And I said, yes, let's do it. So I'm so excited. That may in fact be my first flight is to get down there for that event. But I'm so super excited to do it. And, talking with Abe on how we're going to do this now virtually. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the deal. The Great Smoke is always an incredible deal. Part of the challenge with the Great Smoke is you had to get on a plane in order to experience it. Now you don't. And now you can have this multi-vendor experience, multiple brands, seminars, all the education, all of the value that he brings to this event. And I want to say it's $450 worth of experience. I think the ticket is $169.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't bought your ticket,
go buy your ticket
and do it. It's going to be 8 hours. We're going to be on a stage. We're going to be virtual. There's going to be conversations and interviews and seminars, and you name it. It's going to be just absolutely off the charts. I'm so grateful to be included, and now I feel the awesome responsibility to deliver, and it's gonna be great.
A lot of people be like, well, I'm sorry if I disrespected your whatever the case may be, because I let another retailer in, and I tell people all the time, like, it's not a big deal, Abe, if you ever watch this, if you ever see this, I would love for you to be a guest on the virtual smoke deck. It's no tension here, what I realize is, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna reach out to Abe. I'm gonna reach out to Jeff. I'm gonna reach out to these major companies, quote unquote, that may be competitors to Dapper D Cigars, and be like, hey, let's put on a show.
Let me make something clear. They are not competitors. They are allies, and they are advocates.
Absolutely.
Anybody, look, I don't have competitors. I've never had competitors. Absolutely. I've had peers. That's the way I've always looked at my position in this industry. And we might fight for customers and we might fight for business, but at the end of the day, we are all peers. We're all fighting for the same thing. We're all trying to preserve our rights to enjoy our products. That's just the way it is. And you have no bigger advocate and peer than Abe, Jeff, Dave Garofalo up in New Hampshire. I mean, you talk about another guy on the other side of the country, or the other end of the country. But Dave he had one store in Boston. Now he has multiple stores in New Hampshire, successful e-com, incredible web show and podcast, arguably the most listened to podcast in premium cigars. Mm-hmm. He's not your competition. He is your advocate and your ally. I think you should reach out to all of them.
One thing about our show, that I came into 2021 with is the perspective to understand that, hey, I don't have it all together. Me, kind of personal story is me and my wife went on a journey in 2020 to amend all the hurt or the pain or all the dysfunction that was caused in our life and say, hey, this is a thing. This is what we're going to do to make this thing not ever happen again. And one thing I never want to do, one thing I never say, anything I don't want to do is try to make it seem like we're against so-and-so. Nah, because these brothers of the Leaf have done something successful for X, Y, and Z amount of years. It's always a learning experience with me. The one thing before it was a Dapper D's, I used to tell people in Memphis, when I used to work in Memphis, man, if y'all haven't seen Corona Cigars, man, they are for sure one of those sites that you have to go on. Even in person is even bigger. And like you said, David Garofalo, I said Garofalo. Gustavo, excuse me.
Doesn't matter. As long as you go to Two Guys Smoke Shop and buy, he doesn't care what you say.
Hey, we're going to do a collaboration. 2021 is all about making the differences. Hey, I don't want to hold you up too much more. There's one thing I wanted to get into.
Go to it.
You're one of the most dapperest guys up in the industry, hands down. So many pictures. I love seeing your posts because it's it's inspirational to me. It's like, yo, that outfit that he has, I want to put that together. That picture or that dynamic of that photo that he took, I want to put it together. Where did you discover the inner dapperness to you and was like, this is me?
That's an interesting question. My parents will tell you,
outside of the virtual smoke day.
My parents will tell you, and I have a twin sister. My twin sister will attest. I spent my whole life as a kid getting into different costumes, being different characters. Some days I would go to school, and I went to a regular public school, but maybe once a month I would dress up in trousers, a blazer, a shirt, and a tie. For no reason other than I felt like dressing up that day. I've always felt like clothing was my ability to just put me on. And that's different all the time. When I joined, well, let me back up. When I was a musician as a jazz guy,
come on,
jazz brings with it a certain sense of style.
Come on.
So I always enjoyed that spirit of dressing jazz.
Yes, indeed.
I also was working retail in cigars, but I didn't have the advantage of going home before a gig. So I would dress from the moment I left my house. I would dress for my gig at 10 o'clock at night. So I would go to class in a blazer and slacks and loafers. And then I would go to work in a blazer, slacks, and loafers. And then I would go do the hit wherever that hit was going to be. I became very comfortable dressing. Now, that's not to say I dress up every day. I don't. I mean, there's, weekends, I'm in whatever's on the floor from the night before, jeans, t-shirt, like whatever's there, I put them on again. But I dress authentically for me in the moment. But dressing up, it really came to light working at Davidoff. We were required in a dress code to wear a jacket, shirt, and tie every day. And when I started, like I said, I was 22. I had no money. I went to the Brooks Brothers outlet, and I bought a gray suit and a blue suit.
Well, that cost you a lot of money.
And they were $280 a suit. Mm-hmm. And I think I got some shirts and ties for free as part of a deal. I forget how it worked. And then I made my schedule Wednesday through Sunday because Saturdays and Sundays we didn't have to wear a suit. So I knew I could survive in 2 suits 3 days a week and be good. And I did that for years. Then, but in 2003, so you may be familiar with the brand One Off, which has the pink peace sign that Dion Giolotto now owns. That was originally owned by a guy named Andrea Molinari, who was an airline executive in Italy, and he owned a Casa del Habano in Milan. And he launched this brand from scratch called One Off with the peace sign. Very eccentric, super cool guy. In 2003 or 2004, we were selling the product at Davidoff, New York, and we were selling a ton of it. Andrea asked me to come to Milan as his guest to talk to the Italian retailers about how we were selling One Off so successfully in New York. Which was, I was 23, 24. And I will never forget, I landed in Milan and I got off, I landed at Malpensa, I took the train to the city and I got out and immediately I was struck by the fashion. Just by not the I didn't understand fashion. I guess I was more struck by the confidence that men had wearing such incredible colors and patterns and all this stuff and putting them together in such a way that made absolutely no sense to me. It broke every rule I knew.
Every rule.
And so you also have to do time and place, right? 2002, 2003, 2004. That is really when wide collars were getting wider, collars were getting higher, lapels were going out to here. And I went straight down that rabbit hole. Being in Milan, seeing that, and the exchange at the time, I was able to buy shirts and ties there. And I went home with my same two suits, but I started wearing shirts and ties that were just crazy.
Right.
Then I met a good buddy of mine that worked for Etro, and Etro is an incredible brand that at that time really was way outside patterns and colors and stripes and paisleys and polka dots. And so he was able to help me afford Etro. And so I started having more tools in my toolbox to really just go completely nuts. Mm-hmm. I will tell you a funny story to bring this full circle. I went to Abe's Great Smoke for Nat Sherman in 2012, and I had on purple paisley pants. I did have a white shirt on, if I recall, a crazy tie, a striped jacket. It was probably the most radical ensemble I had ever put together. And I remember seeing Abe early on, and I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Hey, Mike, thanks so much for being here." And in the back of my mind, I was like, there was no comment about this. You know? And then 3, 4, 5 exchanges, there was no recognition of the craziness of my ensemble. And I realized two things in that moment. Number one is I was not exceeding expectations. I was doing exactly what people expected. Number two, I realized that people remembered me for what I wore, but they did not remember me for me or who I was or what I was about. Now, that was an important tool for me when I was 22, 23, 24, trying to be recognizable as a young man in what was clearly an old man's world.
Yeah.
But what I realized at that event was I really needed to shift my thinking.
Come on.
And so it was that event when I got home that I went back and I bought a blue suit and a gray suit and 5 white shirts. And I switched because it became more important that I do want you to remember the fact that I dress well, but I don't want you to remember what I'm dressed in, because I want to get past that for you to say, what's your name?
Yeah.
What do you do? Who are you? What's your story? I did an interesting, I had the opportunity to do a conversation with the PCA, formerly IPCPR, but PCA, about menswear and fashion within the context of cigars. And I shared this story because I think there is something about creating a memorable persona. Mm-hmm. But then it's also really important to make sure that you invite people to get past it, to learn who the person is, not the persona. And so if I look at how my style has evolved over the last, let's say 8 years, it's this, it's a little more plain. I want you to remember the fit. I want you to remember the collar. I want you to remember that, maybe things are put together in a unique way, but I don't want you to remember, oh, that was a brown herringbone jacket he had on and he wore it again on the next interview. Right. I want the clothing itself to be anonymous so that I am no longer anonymous. And then I feel like we can connect in a more meaningful way. The other thing I'll say is, because I'm rooted in New York for so long, our policy is we dressed to our best dressed customer. And so that meant that we were always elevated in our style in the store, both at Davidoff and at Nat Sherman, because we had people coming in suits and we had to meet them where they were.
Come on.
You could always come down with personality, graciousness, and hospitality. But it is very difficult to climb up in Midtown.
Yeah.
So for the last 20 years, I've worn jackets, suits, and ties. But going back to authenticity, which is where we kind of started this story, at this point now, a jacket, a shirt, and a tie are as authentic and comfortable to me as Pete with tattoos and dressed in black, and Matt in chunky jewelry and his goatee and his glasses.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a costume. It's our expression of us. And the funny thing about Pete and me and Matt is we are very dear friends. I mean, we talk regularly, not on Zooms, not on, for live consumption of consumers, but just to check in on each other because we genuinely love each other and care about each other. We couldn't be more different, but we're so passionate and we're so authentic to who we are that even though I'm in a suit and Pete's in black and tats and Matt has a grungy goatee and chunky jewelry, we all are really the same at the end of the day.
Absolutely. As we wrap up, one thing that we do here on the Virtual Smoke Deck is we drop a gem. Any gem, anything, doesn't have to be about cigars. It can be about life. It can be about anything. What is one gem that you will want to leave here on the Virtual Smoke Deck for all of our viewers that's watching now, as well as our viewers that will watch in the future?
I'll start with the current context of this message, and then I'll rewind it back to why it's meaningful for me. I said earlier that the arms are welcome to this industry. You don't have to be born in a tobacco field to be in this business. You have to be passionate about it. But you also need the humility and willingness to learn. In a 2020, 2021 context, there is more pressure than ever to be perceived as the expert in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many people are spewing what can be perceived as expertise. But in reality, there was a large amount of that expertise that was learned on the very platforms that folks are now self-proclaiming that expertise. And that also means a lot of ill-learned knowledge as fact when it's not. The greatest advice I received came from Manolo Quesada, and I was probably 23 or 24. I cannot remember the company I was in, but I'm pretty sure it was a trade show. And it was after hours, and I was invited to have cocktails with leaders of industry, as I recall. And I felt really compelled to convince these elders at the table that I was one of them. And so, I mean, it's kind of coming back. I remember Benji Menendez was there, whose family started Monte Cristo. And I started chiming in with my tidbits of knowledge just to try and participate. And at one point, Manolo leaned over in his deep voice and said, "Son, shut the fuck up and listen." And in that moment, I shut the fuck up and I listened. And what I realized was you make a much better impression when you show up with the humility to learn from the people who know more. And more importantly, when you show up with the expectation that the people around you have more to give you than you have to give them. If I fast forward that now to 2020, now 2021, we all want platforms. I mean, we live in a social media world where we all want to share our expertise to be the resource. But I will tell you now confidently, with 21, 22 years in the business, I have way more to learn still than I know. And I'm going to get that from people who have been in the business longer than me and who have been in the business less time than me. But because of the diversity of experience, I still have a lot to learn. And so I guess my gem would be to listen, to ask more questions than you give answers, which I recognize I broke all those rules in the entirety of this interview. But you asked me the questions, so I had to answer. But there is so much to learn. And if you look at these platforms, not as your pulpit to provide information, but rather your encyclopedia to receive it, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you will learn so much and then put that into your process as you grow as an individual. That would be my my final message.
You know, excuse me, Mike. I want to say, while everybody is watching, while you are on, not when you go away, this is probably
people say a lot of shit about me while I go away.
This has been one of the most educational segments I done had out of all my people that I have had on. This has also been the longest, but it's not, it hasn't been the longest in a perspective like, oh man, we were just planning on drawing this out. This has been educational from point A to point B. I mean, it took us 35 minutes to even get to your introduction, you know, and now we're here. And I want to say that Jim is absolutely on spot. You know, that's one thing that I love about bringing people on is I have an aspect or kind of a goal for me is to listen and learn. It's not to sit here and talk. I mean, anybody that watches any of our shows can say that Jack probably talks to hosts, but Jack really talks to listen and understand. And one thing that you have taught us from point A to point B is that you are a freaking phenomenal person. Even looking at pictures, it puts it in perspective of the type of person that you are and the type of mannerism that you carry day in and day out. So I want to thank you so much. And I would like to put a toast to anybody else that's watching. Toast to Michael Herklot and all his future endeavors and successes that he's going to have. Cheers.
I will drink to it. And you, listen, you are embracing the very thing that I just said, which is you bring in the diversity of thought and opinion, learn more, and then share that with other people. To be the conduit of knowledge rather than the provider of knowledge, in my opinion, is a much more valuable attribute. So I feel terrible that I went on and provided, but I can tell you, I'm only here on this show with you because of what the industry and the folks in it have given me. So I'm eternally grateful to my industry, and I will tell you that my plan is to stay in this industry as long as they'll have me.
Come on. Well, Michael, we definitely appreciate your time. We know that you are very, very busy, and for you to take out the last 2.5 hours of your Sunday evening before the week gets started with us, we definitely appreciate it. We hope for nothing but success and true experiences that are mind-blowing here in the 2021 as far as we go on, man. We definitely appreciate you. We thank you so much. If you would stay on for just a quick brief discussion afterwards, I would definitely appreciate you. Again, thank you so much, Michael, for tuning in. And
thank you everybody who watched, and thanks to people who watched on my watch party. I had a bunch of people watching. I tried to send waves as we went, but thanks for everyone who chimed in on my watch party too. And keep doing what you're doing, man. You're doing the right thing. And I'll see y'all soon.
Absolutely. Mike, you have a great night. One thing about the virtual smoke that I love is we often invite perspective that not only the viewers but also the hosts can learn from on a day in and day out. I told you 2021 was going to be major for us. It was going to be major for Dapper D's, and everything that I do from here on out is going to be major. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, give us a huge thumbs up. If you're watching on Facebook, from any platform in Facebook, go and search either the virtual smoke deck live, or if you're watching from our platform, which we gave to you guys, go ahead. Once you exit out of this video, go ahead and hit that like and follow button. We definitely appreciate your support. The virtual smoke deck will not be what it is to this day without you guys. We deeply appreciate you guys. And if you guys are ever looking for a place to get your cigar needs and wants from, go visit dapperdscigars.com for all your cigar needs and wants. Also, go follow us on dapperdscigars.com. Go follow us on Dapper D's Cigars on Facebook and Instagram for all the updated content on what Dapper D's Cigars has to offer. We greatly appreciate your time. We greatly appreciate your engagement. And most importantly, we appreciate you as a consumer in the cigar industry. Make sure you tune in next Sunday. We have a brick and mortar owner, Diana, from a cigar lounge up in the Pennsylvania area that we cannot wait to dive into. She's phenomenal, and I look forward to diving into her story and her knowledge and her understanding, as well as we did in Mike. With that being said, I appreciate you guys tuning in with us tonight, and go ahead and again hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that follow button. But I'm Jack the Cigar Enthusiast, and I'm gone.